Hello, my name is Mary Gardner, and for my case presentation, I chose to focus on Carol Bonnet and how fingerprinting led to finding the killer. I stumbled upon this case by coming across something known as the latent hit of the year. The FBI recognizes a key case each year where latent fingerprints help solve the mystery. They describe it as recognizing an outstanding major case solved with the help from IAFIS. In the year 2012, the Carol Bonnet case received this recognition. In this case, the use of IAFIS was extra special because this was a cold case that had remained unsolved for 30 years. When the proper technology came about in 2008, IAFIS and fingerprinting helped bring this case to a close. In order to understand how forensic evidence helped solve the case, we first need to examine what happened in 1978 that led up to this. On October 17, 1978, Carol Bonnet, age 61, male, was found face down in his apartment with an apparent stab wound. He failed to report to work for 2 days, and so friends called in a welfare check, and the apartment manager called 911 after peeking into the unit and noticing Mr. Bonnet looked unwell. The Omaha Fire Department responded to the call and had to forcibly enter. Once they entered and determined Mr. Bonnet was dead, they called the police to start a proper investigation. It's noted that Mr. Bonnet died from a stab wound by manner of homicide. Once crime scene investigators processed the scene, they documented multiple pieces of evidence that would later prove to be extremely useful. For one, it was documented that the telephone cord was cut and a fingerprint was collected from it. There were towels surrounding the body that had blood, hair, and fecal matter on them. Bottles were collected from the kitchen and trash was collected from the living room. It was noted that there was not a wallet or any money found at the scene. Fingerprints were taken from multiple locations. More alarmingly, there was a note left suspectedly by the killer. It read, "I am leaving this crime with one clue. Find it yourself. Die pig." Lastly, the victim's car was reported missing and was found 2 days later abandoned in Illinois with stolen plates on it. From the vehicle, more prints were lifted and evidence like cigarette butts were collected. With the lack of technology in the late 70s, early 80s, the abundance of forensic evidence was unable to be properly tested. This case went cold until 2008 when the cold case unit was contacted by authorities questioning whether the fingerprints and DNA were ever ran through the updated systems. Forensic technician Laura Casey realized none of the prints were ran through IAFIS, so she got to work. She spent the next couple of days re-examining the evidence and determined what fingerprints were strong enough to be ran through the system. In just under 5 hours, she had multiple possible matches. From here, she nailed it down to one suspect that matched the fingerprint, Jerry Watson, who was already in the system because he had a criminal record. He matched the prints found at Carol Bonnet's house. Cold case unit investigator Doug Herout took over and solved the case. Upon re-investigating, Herout discovered in some of the old evidence that Bonnet had a newspaper clipping with an ad from Jerry W. circled on it. This could be the possible connection between the two. It was later discovered that Watson had lived a few short blocks away from where Bonnet's car was found and had sometime visited family in Nebraska where the crime took place. Watson was in an Illinois prison on other charges and days away from release, so Herout went to collect samples from him, including DNA and fingerprints. Watson's DNA was also a match to a DNA sample found at the crime scene. On October 17, 2011, Watson was sentenced to life in prison for first-degree murder. This case had a large amount of forensic evidence that was unable to be tested back in 1978. If this case was based in today's time, I think it would have been solved very quickly. The killer left all kinds of evidence around the apartment and in the car. In 2008, forensic evidence being retested was the reason why this case was solved. Fingerprints are left on various surfaces. Our fingers leave behind smudges of moisture and sweat that are distinguishable to only ourselves. Each fingerprint is unique, which makes the accuracy of a print in an investigation direct evidence. There are two different categories of fingerprints. Plastic prints are easily seen 3D prints left on soft surfaces like clay, wax, paint, and so forth. Patent and latent fingerprints are found on hard surfaces. Patent prints are typically seen by the human eye and are made by the finger coming into contact with a substance and transferring it to a surface where a fingerprint is made. This can happen with blood, paint, markers, and so on. Latent prints are the most common prints found at a crime scene because they are left behind when you touch a surface. They cannot be seen by the human eye and require another means to lift the print. There are 4 common ways that we can lift latent fingerprints off of a surface. The first is dusting, which is the one most people think of when they think of fingerprinting. Dusting fingerprint works by using powders and tape to lift a print. This can contaminate evidence, so it's not preferred like it used to be. Alternate light source is becoming the most desired approach to fingerprinting. It's also known as ALS and is used with dye stains to illuminate the fingerprint where it can then be photographed. The third one is cyanoacrylate, which is used like a glue fume to bind it to the print and then is used with powders, stains, or light to illuminate it for documentation. The last technique for fingerprinting is the use of chemicals. Notably, the use of ninhydrin, which is used on porous surfaces like paper. This chemical reacts with certain parts of our prints, like the acids and salts from the sweat. The print is then illuminated purple. It's important to know what a fingerprint looks like because they are ran through the identification systems and technicians need to know what to look for. Fingerprints are made up of ridges and valleys. Valleys don't appear like the ridges do, they are typically white space. The ridges appear in the shape of whorls, loops, and arches. Scaling in, the ridges are then examined for patterns of minutiae, which is where the ridges begin and end, and split, which is known as the bifurcation. Automated Fingerprint Identification Systems, or AFIS, is the largest known fingerprint database. It holds billions of prints from law enforcement, criminal records, unidentified prints, and so forth. AFIS is used by law enforcement agencies and can be used to match a fingerprint to a criminal already in the database. Integrated AFIS, or IAFIS, is the FBI's database of fingerprints that they regulate. With IAFIS, the same standards with AFIS apply here. Law enforcement agencies are able to access this system as well. Between both of the systems, the same theory goes. They match different points on a print, including the unique bifurcations and ridges. Once the forensic technician Laura Casey went back to look at the evidence and lift more prints, she was able to lift prints off of 5 pieces of evidence which became the most important. She found prints on the cigarette butt from the car, the beer bottle can from the living room, the severed phone cord, and then from the trash that was from the living room and the kitchen, and then lastly from the towels that had DNA from the hair, fecal matter, and blood. In total, 7 fingerprints were gathered from the crime scene and from the car and were all ran through the database in 2008. 2 fingerprints were from Watson's fingerprints and the rest were Bonnet's or unknown. Along with the fingerprints, DNA from the cigarette butt and a hair from the towel matched Watson's DNA. With this amount of forensic evidence, Watson was deemed to be the killer. The fingerprints collected from the original crime scene were the reason the case was able to be solved. The fingerprints led to a suspect, and other DNA evidence only furthered his guiltiness. Jerry Watson was sentenced to life in prison and convicted of first-degree murder on October 17, 2011. The multiple different forensic technicians that testified in court swayed the jury. This cold case was solved 30 years later with the use of updated technology and forensic evidence analysis. Because of forensic science, Carol Bonnet's killer was brought to justice.